So thank you very much for giving me once again the opportunity to speak at this important forum, this time about sustainability. And to be precise, the question that I want to ask and potentially answer in the next 7-8 minutes is the following. Can we expand the consideration of sustainability benefits within a consumer welfare approach? And I should focus or stress first that this restriction to the consumer welfare paradigm is not to be meant as a statement against recognition of out-of-market efficiencies. What I'm talking about in the next couple of minutes is based on various reports and various academic papers that I've written with co-authors. However, I do not have time basically to cover all of the insights, and would be happy if you could get interested in that material. In what follows, I would like to focus on a hypothetical example, and this is just for clarification and just to focus our ideas. So I'd like to take as an example a horizontal agreement of firms to jointly phase out a particularly polluting fuel type. So it's only basically just for clarity that I'd like to focus on this. And these firms would like to jointly introduce a more expensive but more sustainable type. So most of what I'm going to say will try to focus on this example. I'm going to have 3 sub-questions that I'm going to answer. The first one is the following. How can we incorporate and measure consumer willingness to pay for sustainability? Because once we've done this, then of course it's easy to integrate this in a competitive assessment, just to recognize it as a non-price efficiency. And there are, as we've already heard from Nadine, various tools to do so. And this is why I'm going to be very short here. It's just going to be basically like the point of departure for the rest of my presentation. If we have purchasing data, we can extract possibly willingness to pay from that. However, there are reservations, as we already have heard, but there are other tools that base more on hypothetical choice situations, for instance, tools like contingent valuation analysis and conjoint analysis. And they are covered, for instance, in the report that we've written for the Greek and the Dutch authorities. And I should say that they are widely used, not only in environmental economics, but also marketing. So marketing, basically academics and marketing practice is full of this application, particularly of conjoint analysis. I should also stress that there are also important caveats with respect to these methods, well-known caveats. The willingness to pay is often not very responsive to the true impact. So people seem to have inconsequential preferences, and we have to be aware of this, and we have to be careful. And another of these potential caveats refers to the context dependency. That is that the willingness to pay seems to depend very much on the context that we give the subjects. For instance, information that we give them. And in various work with co-authors, I've tried to change this and make this not a problem, but as an opportunity. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of why this context dependency can provide an opportunity to incorporate, for greater incorporation of sustainability benefits. One example is what I call the right counterfactual. If we had, for instance, in our example, already the sustainable fuel in the market being introduced by a single firm, let's say, and if consumers do not really take it up, we may conclude that the willingness to pay is low. But that may, for instance, only depend because they see other consumers still making the same choice. And an agreement, of course, could change this. It could change collectively the behavior, with it the social norm, and then again, individual willingness to pay. So the practical implication of this is that if we want to think through such a potential change of the context, if we want to have the right counterfactual for an analysis, then we may have to go really down the road and doing a hypothetical assessment and, of course, asking the right questions to consumers. Always, of course, being careful. Another example is what we term the reflective willingness to pay. Consumers at the point of sale, again, our fuel example, may just follow their ingrained habit, their heuristic, which is going for the product with the lowest price, being inert because they're not very well informed about what a new product is. And if we give them more information, give them more time to reflect, we may then get at a completely different decision in a hypothetical choice scenario and extract a higher willingness to pay. This sounds a bit like arbitrary, you could say, because you can get a low willingness to pay and a high willingness to pay. The question of what is the true preference is, as we've also written in our work, we think the wrong kind of question. But what is important here is that this context dependency allows now for guidance by other legal norms without infringing on consumer welfare. Of course, we have to be cautious. We do not want to morally overburden the consumer. After all, we are after the consumer's preference as a consumer and not the consumer's preference as a citizen who goes and votes, for instance, on a collective decision. We have to be very careful about this, and we've written on this in detail. This, however, so far is only focused on what the consumer basically wants to do, with his willingness to pay for instance, him reducing the externalities in others. And now I come to incorporating within market externalities. And this is basically the externalities of other consumers' choices of their fuel choice on me as another consumer. And again, we could apply the same tools. Now we could basically ask consumers about their preferences if not only they themselves, but all other consumers change their behavior. And this is typically what's done not in the marketing application of, let's say, a conjoint analysis, but this is a proper cost-benefit analysis in environmental economics. So we can apply the same tools. And then we extract the willingness to pay to also avoid the negative externalities of others. But this means we now let them vote on other consumers' choices. And this is important to note. This is a consumer welfare analysis, but this is a different one because we're not doing it ceteris paribus. So we must really ask, is this still within the scope, even the economic scope of a competition law, a competition analysis? And I just want to highlight one point. There are a couple of points we have to keep in mind here. And this is the following. In our fuel example, the sale of the non-sustainable fuel is within the legal requirements. So of course, the agreement to phase this out reduces externalities. But are these externalities an expression of market failure? After all, society, with some, of course, inverted commas, because there's, of course, failures in the legal process, etc., but society has made maybe a trade-off between reducing externalities and leaving consumers choices, and as well, for instance, the distributional implications. Because higher fuel prices, that's something, of course, that people have to pay, and maybe it affects some citizens more than others. And we address this in our work but through sharpening the question of indispensability, and to which I don't have much time now to cover this. And once we, of course, acknowledge these within market externalities, then, of course, we open up also the box for additional tools. For instance, there may be health-related externalities of other consumers' choices on me. And as I've also covered in the other reports, there are many, many different ways and methods out there. For instance, dose response methods, or we could use existing databases that measure the negative health implications, for instance. But it's very important that we have to keep one thing in mind. These are typically values that are measured as if we want to have the effect on the whole society, right? And if we're interested in the effect on consumers, of course, we have to recalculate this. And this is also why the market definition is absolutely key. What are the consumers, the potential consumers, etc.? And as we change the market definition, this has, of course, huge distributional implications. Would I have another minute? Or
just one minute.
Okay, then let me leave this out shortly and go right to the concluding part. So the question was the scope within the consumer welfare paradigm, scope for basically taking on board sustainability benefits. Answer one, I think there's a greater scope for capturing perceived sustainability benefits, but we have to carefully use the methods. For instance, varying the context to elicit willingness to pay. As for within market externalities, also there, this reflects or can be seen as a reflection of consumer welfare. But of course, again, the method has to be, or the approach has to be very cautious. And we advocate for basically enriching this with a stricter indispensability requirement, because we must really then answer the question of where the externalities that we now internalize, basically of where they are an expression of a market or social failure, basically. Yeah. This is what I haven't touched on, but maybe there's time later. We have reservations regarding the paternalistic superimposition of true preferences. So it's very hard to think that we know better whether the consumer has a higher or lower degree of altruism in respect to his basically internalization of externalities, but there are again other alternatives, and the alternative is once again hypothetical choice situations where we basically have a choice situation that possibly can overcome potential biases. And fuel, or like fuel saving electricity bulbs, this is a typical example where possibly if you have a different choice context, then we can overcome this kind of potential behavioral biases. So thank you.